My third conifer book was made up of 3 volumes. It was made up of 3 volumes because there's just too much information to fit in one book. Volume 1 is Historical Perspective, and Volume 3 is Shapely Conifers, and Volume 2 is Colorful Conifers. And I'd like to talk about some of the colorful conifers, mainly the blue conifers, a little bit about the blue ones. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is a discussion, or let's say an explanation, of why conifers are blue and what causes the blue color. And to do that, I'll be reading from Chapter 1, page 7, the blue conifers. And the conifers come in a variety of colors, and that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about conifers, was that they weren't all green. You can have yellow ones, you can have blue ones, and you can have lots of different shades of those 3 basic colors. And you even had some red from time to time, usually the cones, or once in a while a little bit of a red shoot on some of the spruce. My favorite color is probably the blue ones. They really caught my eye early on, and a lot of people seem to prefer blue conifers. And the most common or most striking of the blue conifers would be the Colorado spruces, the ones we call Picea pungens. Now, in reality, most of the Colorado spruces are green. They're not blue at all. But in horticulture, the Picea pungens that are worked with are the blue ones, because those are the ones that people prefer. And so you don't see many green Picea pungens in the landscape, but you do see quite an assortment of blue Picea pungens. And Picea pungens hoopsi is one of the more common ones because of its exceptionally bright color. Now, as for what causes conifers to be blue, it's a waxy coating on the surface of the needles. And the wax itself is not blue. It just happens to bend light and reflect it in such a way that we see the blue wavelengths of light from the waxy surface of the needle. And the thicker the wax, the bluer the conifer. This coating itself helps the leaf retain water, and it's actually a survival characteristic in drier climates. And the thicker the waxy coating, the better the leaf holds water, and the more dryness the conifer itself can tolerate. The waxy surface, or the wax, builds up throughout the spring into the summer, and by early summer it has attained its maximum thickness. Throughout the summer, the wax degrades. It degrades in the wind, in the rain, and in chemical sprays. And if someone does a lot of irrigation in a field or in a garden, and the water hits the waxy coating on the leaf, the wax will degrade even quicker. Verl Holden, the Holden Wholesale Nursery in Oregon, did a study one time of why the blue degrades. People thought it just kind of got washed off the needles, but it does not. What happens is algae grows on the needles, and the more moisture you have, the more algae you get, and the algae consumes the wax, and so the wax disappears due to the growth of the algae. And he discovered that you could increase the blueness or maintain the blueness better if you sprayed the tree once or twice during the growing season and early summer with an algicide to control the algae. Then the blue is not degraded as fast. Dick Bush had a way to increase the blueness on his Picea pungens. He would spray calcium nitrate on his fields through his irrigation system. The calcium nitrate would put more calcium into the soil, and I believe that that is what helped the blueness become more intense. Some nurseries put on a dolomitic limestone, and dolomitic limestone has calcium and magnesium, and the calcium and magnesium contribute to the blueness of the conifers also. But you have to be careful not to make the soil too alkaline with the dolomitic limestone, or the plant will suffer. Now, in the early 1900s, Picea pungens were the aristocrat of the conifers produced by wholesale nurseries. And every large wholesale nursery tried to have their own introduction of Picea pungens. And so there were quite a few Picea pungens named. And nurseries still work with Picea pungens, looking for what we call the holy grail of the Picea pungens. Now the blue has always been in color, and Picea pungens has provided quite a wide range of selections for the landscape use. And in my book on pages 8 and 9, I show nice foliage shots of some of the more common Picea pungens that you might find in a nursery. And they're all collected at the same location, photographed at the same time, photographed on the same background, so you can do a fair comparison to try to see which ones are bluer than others. Now the Picea pungens that grow, they do have a few problems. As they get older in the landscape, now I'm talking about the tree forms, as they get older in the landscape, they tend to lose their bottom branches if they are planted in combination with other trees. Because the Picea pungens is not a forest tree. It grows in more of an open type environment in the mountains, in the mountains of Colorado and Nevada, Utah, the Rocky Mountain range. And as they get old, in the mountainous areas, they're under a lot of stress and they tend to lose some branches due to that, but they will be branched closer to the ground. If you have it where it is out in the open, gets a lot of light, good air circulation, good drainage, it will tend to retain branches down to the ground and make a nice full specimen until it's fairly old. However, in some parts of the country, Picea pungens has a relatively short life. Now, by short life, I mean it might be good in the landscape for 20 years, depending upon its location. The areas where the problems mainly occur are in the northwestern United States, where I live, here in Washington, and Oregon. The mild winters and consistent or persistent rainfall allow a spruce aphid to work on the tree throughout the winter. And what the spruce aphid does is it sucks the moisture from the needles. And in the spring, when the new growth starts to push, the dead needles fall off the tree. And you tend to have tufts of new growth at the end of bare branches. And the tree just looks terrible. You can help prevent that by spraying a dormant oil on the tree during the winter, but the dormant oil removes the waxy coating, and so then the tree is green. And then when the new growth comes out, you have these blue tufts with green foliage on the inside. If you're lucky enough not to have spruce aphid problems in the northwest, your tree will stay nice for a much longer time. They don't seem to be as big a problem in the dwarf forms. The aphid looks for the taller tree forms. In the Midwest, they have a short life because of something called needle cast. The needle cast occurs in the summer or spring when the needles fall, but the damage was done the previous summer. There are an disease that affects the needles that causes yellow bands to form on the needles, and the needles gradually die. They'll hang on through the winter, but then the following spring the needles fall, and whole branches will be dead in the tree, and you end up with these dead branches scattered throughout the tree. Now some forms of Picea pungens can tolerate this better than others, and it might also be due partly to where they are planted. And when I talk about the different kinds of Picea pungens, I'll point out some of the forms that seem to have done a little bit better in the Midwest. The plants in my book, which I've photographed, I especially talk about some of the Midwestern forms that look nice even though they've gotten quite old. But a lot of them do not look very good when they get old. One of these things, if you live in the Northwest or the Midwest, don't steer away from these plants because you can still get 20 years of enjoyment out of them, 20 years of pleasure. And one of the things with a garden is it's kind of like a living thing. It's not something that you plant and then you figure you have it until you die. Now, unless you're maybe in your 70s. Because a garden outgrows its, let's say, its beauty. When conifers get old, they're not as attractive when they're younger, in the majority of the cases. And so you have to constantly be thinking about, when do I have to replace a conifer in the garden? And if you get 20 years out of a conifer, that's doing good. And it also allows you to renew parts of the garden, make parts of the garden look nice. I have a friend over in Holland, Will Linson, and he seems to renew his garden about every 5 or 6 years. Each time I would go visit him, his garden had been completely changed. He's constantly putting new conifers in and removing old ones. He likes the variety of putting in new plants and trying out new plants. So don't be afraid to plant these Picea pungens. Just don't necessarily expect to be planting something that will be there for the next generation, because they just don't do that well in the Northwest and the Midwest. Of course, if you live in the Rocky Mountains, that would be a little bit different. And there's some other parts of the country where they do quite well into a fairly old age. And provided, of course, they're planted where they get good air circulation. So the blues in the conifers is very attractive. I love using it with a golden conifer. It makes excellent, what do you say, sympathetic color. And they work real nice together. In fact, I've done some plantings with my own Picea gold drift and Picea pungens the blues, where I have them intertwined, and other areas where I have them planted close together. They really work quite well together. So blue conifers are very important. They're very nice. I really like the blue ones. I like the gold ones. Of course, I'm conifer nuts. I like lots of conifers. But the colorful conifers, Volume 2, there's a whole big section on Picea pungens. And I hope that gives you some input on the blueness of the conifers. And perhaps if you don't have a copy of this book, you're looking into getting one so you can read a little bit more about them. Because when I talk about these things, I'm just kind of hitting at what's actually in the book. And I'm giving you a little bit more background information and more knowledge that I wasn't able to put in the book. So, well, thank you for your attention.